is a super honor to be with all of you today. I am Jim Reeve. If you have no idea who I am, that's okay. I used to joke, if you don't like the message, my name is Casey Treat, who's a friend of mine that has red hair up in Seattle on that. But I believe it is really, really possible, by the way, to have a great family and a great ministry. And not everyone thinks that. Like I think I said a moment ago, I am now 68 years of age. I started Faith Community Church. It was called Faith Community Church back in those days in 1980 when I was 27 years old. I was actually just finishing up my master's degree at Fuller Seminary and was going to go on, in fact, did go on and get my PhD degree in historical theology from Fuller. So I kind of thought I'd get this little church going on the side while I'm getting my PhD. And quite the opposite happened. The church just took off at one time. Fuller Church Growth Institute back in the 80s called us the fastest growing church in California. And while all that time, man, I was trying to press on with my PhD academic degree. I was trying to get this new fledgling church off the ground. And I was married with kids. When the church first started, I had 2 kids. And after a while, I had 3 kids. So a question for you, I want to ask all of you, do you really think it's possible to have a great family and a great ministry, a great family and a great business? I've talked over the years to several extremely successful business people who have flat out told me, not all of them, but quite a few of them, they say, Pastor, I just don't think it's possible to be super successful in business and to have a great family. I've even had a couple of pastors say it to me, not quite that bluntly, but that's in essence what they said. And of course, I suppose on the one hand, you could try to claim some scriptural evidence and say, well, remember when Jesus was ministering and his mother and brothers came and they said, hey, Jesus, your mom's here, your brothers are here. And he said, well, wait, who are my brothers and who is my mother? He said, is it not those that are sitting here right now? And I suppose you could use that as an excuse to try to say, well, ministry should come first. On the other hand, I know that Jesus never neglected family. In fact, I always found this to be amazing. On the cross, while he's dying, he takes care of his mother. Remember that in John chapter 19? He looks at his mom. He says, Mother, behold your son. And he looks at John, the author of the Gospel of John. And then he looks at John and says to him, and son, behold your mother. And of course, we're all aware of the fact that one of the foundational qualifications for being in leadership in church is that you have to be able to manage your own family. Paul says in Timothy, in the Passion Translation, he says, the deacon's heart should be set on guiding his household with wisdom and dignity, bringing up his children to worship with devotion and purity. For if he is unable to lead his own household well, how can he properly lead God's household? So you got arguments, I suppose, on both sides, but I want you to know it has always been my commitment that I was not going to sacrifice my marriage or my family on the altar of success in Christian ministry. After all, families, you guys know this, but nothing, I would say nothing, but I'll qualify it. Few things in life shape who we are, in fact, who we are not, than family. If you go to the doctor, and as I've gotten older, I spend a lot of time at doctors, it seems like now. I'm healthy, but just even keeping health up. And one of the first things, whenever you go to a new doctor, they're going to ask you to fill out a form on your family history, because that affects who I am now, even in my body. If you ever go for counseling or therapy or go see a Christian psychologist, one of the first things they're going to do is take a family history. You see, families, they help us see and define, who we are. That's why all of our dysfunctions, and no family's perfect, but that's why family dysfunctions, the serious ones like alcoholism or drug addiction, that could really make a difference in how kids are going to grow up and handle the challenges of life. On the other side, on the positive side, very few things influence us like family when it comes to believing in ourselves. Who can we be? One of the reasons I think God has enabled me to build a great ministry is because of the healthy family foundation I had through my mom and through my dad. In our culture today, I've always maintained that gangs are counterfeit families. Everything that gangs offer are really what the family's supposed to offer. While I'm on that, bars and pubs are actually counterfeit churches. Everything a church is supposed to provide is what many people feel when they go to a pub. Remember that really, really old TV show Cheers? It had the theme song that goes, "Sometimes you want to go where everybody knows your name." So families are critical, so critical that when I decided to go into the ministry as a young man, one of the biggest hurdles for me was figuring out how am I going to raise my kids? Because I don't want my kids to be PKs. Most of you know what that means, preachers' kids, because I had seen over the years so many preachers' kids that were really sideways and they got messed up. And by the way, before I forget to say it, even great parents and great leaders, you can do your best and still end up with your family or parts of your family going sideways. I mean, Jesus was a fantastic leader. And if you want to look at it from that perspective, he lost Judas. Dependent upon your theology of the origin of Satan, God's a perfect leader. And yet, if Satan is indeed Lucifer, the fallen angel, then God lost Lucifer and up to a third of heaven. So I don't want to come across condemning when we all have our family challenges, and many do, but I don't want to have family challenges because I neglected my family. I don't want that to happen. I always kind of felt like, remember when Jesus said, "What does it profit a man to gain the whole world but lose his soul?" I always believe, what would it profit someone to build the greatest ministry ever, the biggest church ever, the most influential, ministry ever, and yet lose his family? So I'm thankful. Here I am today at 68 years of age, and things are far from perfect. But my own son has now transitioned into the lead pastorship of the church I founded. I like to tease guys. I say, probably for the last 10 years or so, no one had my ear like my son. He was my key advisor, my key helper. And so really what we've done now is that we've reversed roles. I think I'd have to double check with him. Now, I know this is the case. No one has his ear like me. I'm never going to retire. I think it's time to refire. I think my best days are still ahead. But it's been a real blessing to have my own flesh and blood, my son, be able to rise up into leadership and to take over the ministry. I think I made a reference a moment ago that as of this moment, I've been married for 48 years, almost 49 this July 1st. So I'm going for the gold. In fact, I asked my wife to join me. So I'm going to scoot over here a little bit right now, because this is my wife, Marguerite, who, by the way, Glenn, was born and raised in New York, Brooklyn, I think it was. And so welcome, Marguerite. In fact, since we're talking about family, I think one of the reasons that you've been such a successful, some people want to say co-pastor, others want to say pastor's wife, is because you had absolutely zero church background.
It's true.
I dated a few church girls. Actually, she was nicer than most of the church girls. She was. I hate to say that. She was more moral than a lot of the church girls I dated. But when we went into ministry, Marguerite, I think, I'll ask her what she thinks. I think one of the reasons that she became such a successful and is such a successful leader, co-pastor of the church is because you had no preconceived ideas.
That's very true.
And I told you not to have any and you're not musical. See, by the way, I was raised up, if you go to a Bible college, you try to find a girl this is the old school guy, sorry, who could play piano, who could lead music, so she could kind of launch the music part of the church. I ain't getting that with her. She has so many gifts and skills and talents, but singing and music's not one of them.
Right. Well, one of the things I always appreciated is Jim really encouraged me, brought out the best in me. And when I said, no, I don't want to do stuff, he really gave me the courage to step out and do things to discover my gifts and skills and talents. I remember Jim talked about his PhD, and our kids were what, 0, 2, 4 at the time.
Yeah.
And he prioritized. He went and he spent time before bedtime. He'd get one kid on his back playing horsey, and he'd go on all fours chasing the other ones, playing hide and go seek and all those kind of things, then get them to bed, and then stay up till 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, studying and doing what he needed to do.
By the way, I don't have the energy to do that anymore. I was young back in those days.
Right. So, but then when the kids woke up in the morning, I had the privilege, because they'd say, "Where's Dad?" And I'd say, "He's sleeping." Now, they could have thought that he was just some lazy bum that never got up in the morning. And I really got a chance to speak life into them, say, "Dad loves you so much that he stayed up late, did all his work in the middle of the night. He loves people so much that he wants to be able to share with them and give them the same joy that we experience in the Lord." And so you get a chance to help your kids to love church, love God, love your spouse when you speak life into them. And I thought that was one of the key for us. And then the daytime. I read the Bible. He was tired, so I read Bible stories to them. All 3 of our kids love God, and to this day, are passionate about the Lord. And I'd say I probably read the Bible more to them, not putting him down, but he was busy. He was doing stuff, and so rather than
when you're in seminary, remember the old joke about the guys? He said, "I'm glad I got the Bible because it sure does shed a lot of light in all my commentaries." Sometimes it feels like in seminary, you're reading a lot of theological stuff other than the Bible. And here she is reading the Bible. And what was funny? Sometimes I'd come home from a day at Fuller and God had spoken to her from the Bible for real. Remember this, Marguerite? Some of the exact same things I was paying big bucks at Fuller Seminary to learn in theology or church history class or systematic theology or pastor, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
Yours was a lot less expensive.
Yeah, well, I just made sure to, since I wasn't going to school, I wanted to educate myself. And I personally made those commitments to do that.
I think one thing that people talk about family, because I decided to call the talk Faith, Family, and Leadership, or maybe if you're in ministry, Faith, Family, and Ministry. If you're in business, Faith, Family, and Business. But I've never really tried so much to balance, although it is a balancing act a little bit. But my emphasis has always been, look, families first, at least when it comes to church. In fact, if you were to ask me what my priorities are, and I'm not going to tell you what to do. However, if you gave me the time to teach from the Bible, I think I could produce a good case for this, that my number one priority in life, of course, is God. Seek first the kingdom of God, his righteousness. My number 2 priority is my wife, Marguerite. In fact, even once we had kids, she maintained being. I made her my top priority. Sometimes people, I think, when they start to have children, their priorities shift and the kids become more important. I think I don't know if you agree. Okay,
yeah,
good.
Yeah,
I guess I should have asked you about that.
No, definitely.
I think the best thing sometimes a dad or a mom can do for their kids is keep their spouse a priority. So I have God number 1, Marguerite number 2. My kids would be my 3rd priority. Nowadays, my grandkids would probably be my top priority after that. Then my extended family, my mom's still alive. She's still hanging in there. So I want to make her a priority. My other extended family, I'm a little bit brokenhearted today because my brother Bob, who helped me launch the church and then went out and launched his own church, he had been fighting successfully non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, but to make a long story short, he sadly passed away of COVID just a few weeks ago, and we just had his celebration on Saturday, and that was a tough one, but we're bouncing back. After all these priorities is what I'm trying to say: God, spouse, kids, grandkids, extended family. Then comes the church family.
Yeah,
and
but you know what, Jim?
Yeah.
Because I wasn't raised with a healthy family. My mom and dad, I never remembered them being happily married one day in my whole life. And so I didn't know how to have a happy family. And so I just like to do some practical stuff. We had a date night. We tried weekly. Sometimes the kids were sick or whatever. You couldn't do it.
Even when I was getting the church going and it was like unbelievably busy, I was still in my doctoral program at Fuller, which is unbelievably busy. In fact, I don't want to interrupt. Remember the date night. I'll forget where I'm at. Fuller at one time actually pulled me aside and they said, you're the first student we've ever had who's been able to get an academic degree and not only pastor, but pastor a growing church. So all I'm trying to say, in the middle of that, I still prioritized with her to keep our marriage strong at least once a week,
And then
having a date night.
yeah.
And we had no money either.
No money, but we figured it out.
Yeah.
And on the date night, you don't dump all your problems on your spouse. You don't finally tell them about the refrigerator not working and all the things. You know, I would save up fun stories about the kids. I would do my best to be romantic, because sometimes as you get kids, you know, you become like some couples are like brother and sister. No, I wanted to keep romance into our marriage. And so those are some ways you can prioritize. Then have what was it? We to go yearly with us on a family vacation.
Yeah, we tried to have a family vacation every year, and then I needed to recover from our family vacation.
After the family vacation.
I love family vacations, but man, they not only didn't rejuvenate me physically, they wore me out. So normally I would try to have a vacation just with you.
The vacation after vacation.
Either just before or just after.
Usually after dinner.
In fact, since we're talking about that, Marguerite, another thing I think people might like to know is that, and this was by her choice, if she had wanted to be super involved in the ministry from day one, launching into the church, which launched in 1980, we were both 27, I would have had no problem with that. But we had little kids, and especially when the kids were little, just talk for a second that you decided to sort of dial back on the church side of ministry. If it was a business, you probably would have dialed back on your input into the business, and chose to really
well, what I did is by the ages of the kids, some of the things I would do more that I could be at home. I did a lot of ministry at home. I'd get together with people and talk on the phone, and I did things. There was no computers then, so I couldn't work like that from home, but there's a lot of stuff I could do from home. But I wanted to make sure that my kids weren't being raised by other people. I wanted to be able to put my fingerprints, so to speak, in their hearts, and for them to be passionate like I was about the Lord. And sometimes that meant just going to the park and just having fun there and letting them throw silly string at each other. But one of the things too that I learned is that I couldn't be Jim's own personal Holy Spirit, because so many times.
Ooh, by the way, here's a little key that people always ask, what has helped you guys stay married for almost 49 years? We're going to go for the gold.
That's right.
This year's the Olympics, and next year we're going to go for 50, the golden anniversary. But a saying I've always loved about marriage is that the husband should not be the will of his wife. Because I see a lot of guys who interpret being head, they almost become like headship of the home is what I meant to say. That they almost see that as being like their little mini dictator, and they want to get the. So listen, the husband should not be the will of his wife. And you made reference a moment ago, and the wife should not be the conscience of her husband. Because I see a lot of, back in those days, this might sound old school, but a lot of women back in those days tried to almost shame their husbands. Anyway, I interrupted you.
Do you remember what I did? I didn't have a godly model for me. I was a pretty brand new Christian. So I got these scriptures, and I put sticky notes all over the house on things that I wanted God to speak to him. It doesn't work.
I could open up the refrigerator door and there'd be a scripture verse. I remember one time, I don't want to sound crude, I remember one time lifting up the toilet lid, and Marguerite put a scripture verse there. So
yep.
And I remember them. That's good.
Yeah. And then I also had to learn that communication is not rolling your eyes. It's not interrupting. It's not pouting. It's not slamming doors. I can remember one time, I don't know what, I was so mad at Jim, and what I saw modeled in front of me. So I went and I slammed a door. This is before we had kids. And I went to the bedroom and I just laid on the bed crying. And you know what, all the ladies here, they know what I wanted. I wanted you to go in and just hug me and say you love me. But
let me guess. I bet I didn't do that.
No way. I think afterwards.
I didn't even know that's what she wanted.
Yeah.
Now I do.
Yeah.
But back then I didn't.
He thought I need some space. Of course, the lot more space he gave me, the madder I was getting.
And by the way, how this impacted the church when the church was super growing, and I was trying to get my PhD from Fuller, is that from day one, I let the church know that as leader of the church, I was there too. I love in Ephesians, and Paul said, the leadership, apostles, prophets, evangelists, pastors, teachers, is to equip the saints to do the work of ministry. I said, if you want to come to a church where you're going to watch the leadership on the platform, the pastors, the leaders, do all the work of ministry, and you're going to sit back and on Sundays and pay your tithe and then go live your own life Monday through Friday, I'd say you're at the wrong church, because at this church, we believe in the equipping ministry. I believe my job as pastor is to not do all the hospital calls myself, not to do all the visitations myself. I said, my job is to equip the people to minister to one another. And that's part of what freed me up to be able to keep my family atop ministry. Because I find some pastors, for example, I don't know if they do this anymore, and they had a good heart. They were trying to do the right thing, but they would spend all their time counseling herding sheep, and it would just drain them of energy. And I'm sure it helped, and that's great. And I'm not saying shepherds shouldn't care for sheep; they should. But we try to say from the very beginning, I'd let the church know, look, my family's my top priority, and if that's going to be a problem with you, you probably won't like this church. I found that more people liked the church because of that. It's kind of like kids. If we prioritize, if I make Marguerite a higher priority than my children, rather than them resenting that, I found that most of the time it gives them more security.
It does.
Because they feel mom and dad are okay. And in church, if they feel like, well, pastor's marriage is strong, he's not looking at Sister Cutie in the choir or something like that, rather than them being upset because, well, I want to talk to the pastor and I want to do this. There is some of that, by the way. I'm not saying there's none of it, but not as much as I thought over the years, because we just set that up as a principle. So our church knew that God was my top priority. Marguerite was my top priority. After that, my family, they were a priority, but they just weren't as important to me. That's not the right way of saying it. They weren't as prioritized. They prioritized.
So many people told me also that that helped them to prioritize. You know, we would tell people Monday is our date night. Don't call us Monday night. Thursday is our family night. And so
I used to joke with people. I say, if I'm having a date with my wife, Marguerite, and you call and have to talk to the pastor, now I'm teasing, but there's a little bit of truth there. I'd say, you better be in the hospital dying. I said, because if you're not, and I leave my date and come visit you, you will be dying by the time I'm done. Hope you guys know I'm teasing, but there's some truth there, though.
Well, what I really like is that they modeled that, and so they appropriate that in their lives. And I've had so many people say, we have a great marriage, we have a happy family because of what we learned and what we saw you guys not only teach us, but what we saw you model before us.
Yeah, amen. Well, before we're done here and go to some Q&A, let me just, because we've kind of been talking, I think it's been helpful. Hope it's been helpful. But let me just give you guys, I want you to stay, Marguerite. We can still throw in a few thoughts here.
Okay.
Just a few principles that Marguerite and I have tried to work on to build a great family while at the same time building a great ministry. And by the way, we're not perfect. We've not just had problems with all of that. We've had major issues. To this day, we still have major issues with family. I know whoever told me the more kids you have, and then you get more grandkids, and then you get all, pretty soon you have this whole crew of people. In fact, here's what being a minister is like. I remember family vacations, and this is just with 3 kids. I bet if you just have 2 kids, it's going to be like this. Maybe just 1 kid. Even issues like, where are we going to eat tonight? That becomes an issue because someone's never happy, or where we're even going to go on vacation, or if we're going to have a fun time. So literally, there's never a time when everybody is always perfectly happy.
Sure.
I tell pastor friends of mine, if you think having a big church is fun, I used to have pastors tell me, man, Pastor Jim, Dr. J, I can't wait till my church gets big like yours so I can afford to have a staff, can afford to do this, and my life's going to be good. I always felt like telling them, you don't know what you're talking about. I mean, a bigger church is just a bigger headache because you have more people that you're trying to get along and all of that. On the other hand, it's also a tremendous blessing. Anyway, I promised to give you a couple of principles. So here they are. Principle number 1, and we put this into practice. Persistence is the key, or at least one of the keys to success in anything. Ministry, marriage, family. I like how Paul, or whoever wrote Hebrews, not all scholars agreed that Paul wrote Hebrews, but the writer of Hebrews says in chapter 6, he says that we are to be imitators of those, listen to this, who through faith and patience inherit the promises. So in other words, it doesn't just take great faith, it takes great patience, and it takes great discipline. It takes persistence. You got to hang in there, keep on keeping on. Someone said one time, I know in my life, sometimes it's not the big things that tend to take me out. I've learned over the years in ministry and in marriage, I can handle the explosions, the things you think are going to kill you, and sometimes they almost might. My own brother's death a few days ago. But you know, the things that can really get to me, it's the daily grind. It's the little things. There's an old saying, it's the grind that gets them. I've had to watch out for that. And a second thing, that if persistence is a key to success, then vision is the key to persistence. There's a passage in Hebrews that's talking about Moses going before Pharaoh. And it says, he persisted, he didn't give up, he kept on keeping on, because he saw him who is invisible. In other words, he had his eyes on God, he had his eyes on the kingdom. So the only reason Moses was able to hang in there through thick and thin, good and bad, the reason he was able to have persistence because he had vision. It's important to keep vision.
And when you have vision for your marriage, then you won't make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions.
Say that again. That's a big one.
Oh man, it's so easy to want to make permanent decisions based on temporary emotions. You're mad, and what you want to say is, I'm out of here. I want a divorce. I mean, in that moment, you might really be feeling that, but you really don't. When you have vision for your marriage, so by just give yourself a time out. Just give your, sometimes we talk about giving kids a timeout.
So since we've been having fun and laughing a lot, give me on out. Have there been times you've seriously thought about divorcing me?
Absolutely.
See? So thank God she was persistent. She hung in there. Are you glad you're still married to me?
Absolutely.
That we're going to be going almost on 50 years?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, and you just need to think better thoughts.
Yeah. And by the way, that applies to ministry too. Sometimes the only way to make it through a difficult time of the church is to take a step back and realize, hey, is this God or not? Or I'm going to hang in there.
Right.
If this thing kills me, I ain't going to quit. And anyway, remember, this isn't Bible verse. There's an old saying. I applied it to sports. It's always too soon to quit, and failure's never final. I want to turn to questions here, if there are any, in just a moment. If not, we did a great job. Persistence is the key to success. I've said vision's the key to persistence. I think it's good in a family or in ministry to die to unrealistic expectations. Man. I mean, remember the old joke? Most guys want to, marry a girl who looks like, Halle Berry, and can cook like some of those, cooking gals.
Cooking shows.
Yeah, and then they end up, so listen, life's not really like that. It's all social media. I bet you've been told that a lot. Life doesn't look like our Instagram photos and social. It just doesn't look like that. So you have to die to unrealistic expectations.
And on that, by the way, as I'll say for me as a woman, I had to realize that I could not expect my spouse, Jim, to give me what only God could give. And for some reason, I think a lot of us, we want someone that's always going to listen to us, always going to be patient and kind. If you're looking for that in a spouse, that just is not realistic.
A lot of people look for in a relationship what only God can give them.
Absolutely.
Remember that old romantic song a few years ago, 1960s, I think it was from Funny Girl, Barbra Streisand, had a famous song that went about two single people, a feeling deep in my soul that said, I was half, now I'm whole. Listen, singleness is not a disease, and marriage is not the cure.
Absolutely.
And a successful marriage isn't one half person finding another half person to make it a whole person. It's two whole people who are healthy. Another thought I want to throw out is don't ignore or underestimate the small things. One of the reasons we've been able to succeed in ministry to whatever level we've had success and in our marriage relationship is because you can't for too long just ignore the things that seem little. There's a verse in the Song of Solomon that says, Song of Songs, chapter 2, verse 15, watch out for the little foxes that spoil the vineyard. Sometimes those little things become big, which, by the way, is one reason we were pretty diligent and still are, about having a date night. When our kids were little, we had a family night, Thursday night, every week was family night. And again, there better be a huge emergency in the church if you want to pull me away from my family night. My memory, Marguerite, back in those days, our kids are all grown now. We got grandkids, but we would bake chocolate chip cookies. I know he's become a little bit of a scandal, but back those days, Bill Cosby show was great with the Huxtables and the Family Ties and stuff. We just had great, great family times. And my kids never had to lose their dad to the ministry. They knew they were important to me. So don't ignore the small things. But I also want to say another thing: big things can change. Paul says in Philippians, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. After, decades of ministry and decades of marriage, I've learned that when you have momentum, everything seems easy. There were decades that Faith Community Church had major momentum. And I'm telling you what, when you have momentum as a church, you can have a scandal in the church. Maybe not the senior guy, but you could have on the sub youth guys or whatever. I don't want that. It's terrible. But if you have momentum, bam, you can bust through that. And when you've lost momentum, it's like any little thing just becomes a major thing. So I know how to lead a church when you've lost momentum. I know how to try to recover a relationship when you've lost momentum. So listen, don't ignore the small things, because that'll steal your momentum. But if you have lost momentum, I want to promise you, it's not easy. Sometimes you think it's going to kill you, but big things can change.
Absolutely.
So something else, I actually had 7 things. I'm giving you 7, but I got 2 more. One more thing I want to give you is that never stop learning and growing. I love Ecclesiastes 10:10. It says, if the axe is dull and the edge unsharpened, more strength is needed, but skill brings success. You are never wasting your time sharpening the axe. I don't know how we've done with you today, but you are not wasting your time going to this conference and going in on Zooms. Some sessions will be great. Oh, I saw other sessions you're like, that wasn't so good. But you're always sharpening the axe, and it's going to pay off big time. I really like that. And go ahead.
I was thinking of one particular conference that Jim went to, and at that time we were facing some huge things in the church, and he was ready to. He hadn't told anybody except for me, but he was ready to give up.
Yeah.
And one speaker at that one conference broke through.
Said one thing. My
yes.
memory's out. It wasn't even that great a speaker.
It's true.
But he said one thing that the Holy Spirit ministered. Anyway, go ahead. Finish.
And it totally changed his heart, his life in ministry, which eventually impacted our marriage, because it's tough being married to someone who's just really going through it in the ministry. And
yeah, whether I want to or not, I'm dragging them through it.
It's true. And so I just want to hope that if there's anybody here, whether it's your personal relationship, your spouse, your kids, church things, if you've lost hope, I pray that you will hear today, in all the stuff bantering that we've done, that big things can change. And your situation can change.
Yeah. No matter what, trust God was my last point. In fact, that makes me, let me close with the story, and then I'll throw it back to Dan and see if there's any questions. Or Glenn. Dan's my son. Glenn, I already feel so close to you. You're like a son. But I remember one time a few years ago watching Billy Graham at the end of his life be interviewed. And Billy Graham was, for me, always kind of a hero / mentor at a distance. I only got to meet him once in the setting of a large group. So but he really was. And in this interview with Billy Graham late in his life, he came across to me, and I love Billy Graham, but he came across to me a little bit negative, a little bit like, man, the world's a worse place. I'm not sure how well my ministry has done. And anyway, that's how it landed in my world. Well, the next day, I actually was here in Orange County going to meet personally with Oral Roberts. And I knew that Oral Roberts late in life had become good friends with Billy Graham. Billy Graham and Oral Roberts had become very good friends. So the next day I said, hey, Oral, did you see the thing with Billy last night? And he goes, I talked about it. I said, Oral, are you discouraged at this point in your life by the way the world's going, culture's going? Are you discouraged? And I'll never forget, man, it was so good for me, because I'm a little bit more in personality like Billy Graham. she's a little bit more like Oral Roberts, which is why God gave her to me, to keep me encouraged. And Oral pointed his finger at me and he said, Jim, he said, I am never discouraged because I believe in the power of the seed. I'll never forget that. He said, you know, a seed, you can put a seed in dirt and it can be there for hundreds, even thousands of years lying dormant. You think it's dead, it's gone. The region that seed is in may look like a desert in the Sahara, but all it takes is a little bit of rain to hit that, a little bit of Holy Ghost to hit that, and that seed still has life in it. And he said more of it, man, that really, really touched my life. For all of you that are in business, man, yes, you can have a great family and a great business. You that are in the ministry, hey, listen, I know it can get extraordinarily challenging, discouraging. It can also be great and seasons of blessing, but just like I said, don't quit, man. It's always too soon to quit, and failure is never final. Yeah, let me talk, but let me toss it first to my wife, because I've always teased that my wife, I think, has what I call the gift of discernment, and she could pack her schedule with counseling. So what comes to your mind first on that, Marguerite? Some of the unique challenges either we've or families in the church have faced?
Neither Jim and I have a counseling degree. And so we would always make it, I would be a good listener to them, but we had people in the church that were more able and equipped, like if someone had an autistic child or stuff like that, we try to get them into a group where they could get that specific. But a lot of the stuff was really listening to people, helping them just make the right priorities, and then just following through with just some common sense stuff.
In the early days of our church, we had one of my key associates was heading to our evening service one night. And this is back before cars had cameras and everything like that. To make a long story short, it was very tragic. He accidentally, his little 2 or 3-year-old kid came out to greet him, ran behind the car, and the pastor of my church accidentally ran over his own kid. And of course, we rushed to the hospital. We prayed that he would live, but he didn't. He passed away. And statistics are, if a mom and dad lose a kid, the statistics on their marriage making it is very small. And if one of the parents accidentally caused the death, it's almost nothing. So we would spend time with Chris and with his wife Ingrid, and we would minister to them. As Marguerite said, we're not professional counselors, but we can listen, we can pray. We've done a lot of stuff through groups. We're also not afraid to refer if someone needs some professional counseling. We will refer to professional counseling. We've had a recovery ministry, for example, that at one time was so big that the local cities were sending people. The judges would send people from the courts to them. So I don't know if I'm doing too good a job answering your question, but we're neither one of us are trained. We just did our best, and we did a lot through groups, because if a church gets big, Rick Warren used to call counseling ministries sinkhole. He said people have so many needs that if you tried to hire counselors at your church to handle all the people's needs, it'll get more and more of a need. So a lot of ways is just through groups and through loving and through helping. So
and when people are in like a group, like a hiking group, they get relationship, and out of that, naturally, sometimes they'll start talking and friendships, and they're able to support each other like that, rather than in a formal way of coming in for a traditional counseling situation.
Yeah, and yes, we have gone through stuff ourselves. I've had a son go through a divorce, and that was unbelievably painful. The silver lining is that he's very happily remarried. We really like his new wife, but so we've gone through personal stuff as well. One of the things I would say about that, and by the way, I would say that issue is one of the largest issues I can see facing the church right now. Partly because of cultural change, because of gender issues, because all these issues. I've never seen in the history of my ministry so many parents and grandparents dealing with pretty radical issues with their kids and with their grandkids. And honestly, there's no easy answer, but I would say this, and then I'll see if you have anything to say on this too. I've always tried to communicate with everyone I've dealt with that there's a difference between love and approval. Some people have a hard time distinguishing between them. Well, for example, I don't think people should live together unless they're married. So if my kid comes home and wants to stay in my house, all these issues, I'm like, well, listen, you don't have to stop loving your kid because you do not approve of what they're doing. People sometimes have a hard time separating those. They're like, well, then that means you don't love me. No, it doesn't mean I don't love you. I love you. My love for you is unconditional. I don't love you any more or any less. If you go out and get hooked on drugs, I don't love you any more or any less. If you go out there and experiment with stuff that, quite frankly, as a believer, I don't think is right, it doesn't affect my love for you one iota. But if you're looking for me to approve of that, then that becomes an issue. And so, then we'll try. See, for kids to be helped, they have to want to be helped themselves. And so we end up talking almost more to the parents and grandparents sometimes, because you can't help the kids until they're ready to get help.
Right. When you're on an airplane, they always give that safety spiel where if you're traveling with a child and the airbag comes down, put your own airbag on first before you deal with the person
That's
who's
good.
sitting
I like
next to you.
that.
And I think so many times we get, especially as Christians, we're ready to fix it. I am ready to fix it. I'm ready to go into fix it mode, and to my own detriment, to where I'm exhausted. I don't have anything left. And what I need to model is taking care of myself, which is
By the
hard.
way, I'm glad you shared that, because that really is true. Sometimes people think you have strengths and then you have weaknesses. Very often, in my opinion, your strengths, the same thing is also your weakness. And one of Marguerite's strengths and one of her weaknesses, the same thing, is that she loves people so much. She's a rescuer, whether it's family or people in church. And when she hears bad news or tough news, boom, she shoots into rescue mode. She starts doing all of this, and sometimes she can wear herself out.
I often do.
I have to warn her, Marguerite, I like that illustration you used of the plane. If the plane's having issues, you have to put your own oxygen mask on first, make sure you're doing okay, do all that. That was good. I don't know if it helped or not.
Yeah.
But I liked
for
it.
instance, if you're dealing with someone that with a drug addict or stuff like that, we want to be in rescue mode. And what we want to tell them is to trust the Lord, but we have to model that ourselves. And part of modeling that ourselves isn't going into hyper rescue mode. It's taking a walk and just taking care in a good way of things that empower us to have our own equilibrium.
Biblically, sometimes we need to pray, kind of like in the story of the prodigal son. The father didn't go out and make his son come home. The Bible says eventually the son got wallowing in sin so much says that he finally came to his senses. And the son decided to turn around and to head home. And when he did, the father loved him unconditionally and accepted him. I heard someone say one time, what is it that when God closes one door, he opens another? But what they don't tell you is it sure can be hell in the hallway. And so sometimes while you're waiting for your kid to come to their senses, it's beyond challenging.
And we don't want to help them feel the consequences, because we don't want them to feel pain. But often that pain is some of the stuff that is going to motivate them to change. And so
kind of that tough love idea.
Oh man, it's tougher on you as a parent than it is a kid.
Yeah. I think it's tougher on the father than the prodigal son. That's true. That's true. When it comes to physical violence, I don't know how things are in Jamaica. But I know in the States, if it's life-threatening at some point, that would be one of the few times I might and might not, it depends on the circumstances, encourage the person to get away from there for a while. If it's serious enough, they may even have to bring the authorities in. I definitely think that kind of issue persons would do well to get some kind of Christian advice slash counseling slash therapy, because I think that kind of stuff becomes at least to me, kind of becomes sort of unacceptable. But it's, by the way, it happens here too. And I'm glad you said, not among those out in the world. We're talking about people that are in church and call themselves Christians.
Yeah, I think that is right up there with being unfaithful, because you are breaking your vows by either one of them. I'm not saying it's grounds for divorce. I don't mean that, but it's serious. It's very serious. It affects not only the spouse, it affects the kids. It sets them up for in the future for picking spouses that are like that. So,
yep. And on a more practical level, one of the pieces of advice my dad gave me, it doesn't directly relate to it. It relates to the question, but it doesn't directly answer it. That my dad, my mom and dad, who were married until my dad passed away, almost 50 years, they would have made it, but my dad died. And one of the pieces of advice he gave me was, Jim, he says, your mom and I have always tried to see to it that we both don't get super mad at the same time. In other words, if my dad was kind of starting to get angry and my mom sensed it, even if my mom was convinced she was right and he was wrong, she would kind of back down on the issue and maybe bring it up later when things had simmered down, and vice versa. If my dad saw my mom's temperature was starting to get way up there, because they said, and boy, have I seen this in ministry, serious damage is done in relationships when both parties get super mad and lose control at the same time. So Marguerite and I have tried to always put that into practice. And fortunately, we haven't had a whole lot of that issue. In fact, the violence, zero issue. But if I can see her getting really upset or intense about something, I'll try to back off.
That's a great principle.
Remember, there's this Bible verse that says, don't let the sun go down on your anger. So for a while, I think Marguerite thought that meant we had to solve every issue before we went to sleep. And she had to kind of learn that with me.
Jim, go take a nap. We'll talk when you go. You're a little bit happier.
Plus, she had to learn with me that if she brought up all these issues just before I'm supposed to go to sleep, she would feel better because she talked about it and then rolled over and go to sleep. I would be up all night worrying about these issues.
Yeah.
So anyway, I'll really be praying for you, man. Those are very real and tough issues. God can help these people. I've seen God do miracles, but it's not always easy.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Great question. Kind of what I think what I did growing up, which apparently seemed to work because we have 3 pretty healthy grown kids now, is that I would kind of bring them along whenever possible with ministry stuff I was doing. And obviously they had to get bigger first. When the kids are really little, that can be challenging. So I tried to include them where it was appropriate. If I was doing a hospital call and could take them in.
Or even a funeral.
Even funerals. I would try to take them with her, along with doing stuff they love. Like I was involved with their sports growing up, stuff that was non-churchy, but I really, really tried to include them so that ministry kind of became natural to them. One thing we never did, which a lot of my friends do, and by the way, one's not right and one's not wrong. It just depends on what you are. I have friends that were senior pastors and their homes were like open homes. I mean, people would come and stay there. So their homes almost became like ministry centers. For my personality, and in our case, we decided not to do that. We kept our home like a haven. So we never brought people into for guests we did. I'm talking people staying there, and living in your house. Obviously, people over for dinner and fellowship. So I tried to hang time with my kids. So I would do it by just spending time with them. I remember years ago, I think it was John Wimber and Vineyard years ago, that talked about how did Jesus disciple his disciples? How did Jesus mentor them? And I kind of use that as a model for how I mentor people and how I tried to mentor my kids as they were raised. And it was very simple. Here's how Wimber said it. He said, as Jesus had his followers around him, he said, number one, Jesus did it and they watched. That was the first step. He'd let them watch him doing ministry. I try to let my kids watch and hang with me in ministry. Step number 2, he did it, Jesus did it, and they helped. So as they began, if he was going to pray for people, he might let them pray for a few people. Step number 3, they did it and he helped. In other words, they got to a point where they got big enough, the disciples did, family did, or maybe you'll let them pray, maybe you'll let them go out, and then he was there to help if they needed help. And of course, it goes full cycle, because the final step is they did it and he watched. And I always really like that. It starts with he did it, they watched, he did it, they helped, they did it, he helped, and finally they did it and he watched. And it's fun now to watch my own kids with my grandkids. She used to pray the Lord's Prayer driving to school every single day, and they'd put on the armor of God in the car. They would pray, and God, I put on the belt of truth, the breastplate of righteousness, the helmet of salvation, the shoes of peace, and we'd get dressed with our armor of God. And things we did with our kids, it's really fun now to see them doing that with our grandkids. So I don't know how well this answered, but I say the biggest thing, I tried to include them as much as I can, as much as I could, not always possible, but as much as I could in the ministry. So it wasn't like a separate thing taking me away from them all the time.
One thing also is that so many times we'll think of, okay, memorizing scripture, but I believe Jim was exceptional, even better than I ever was on this. He would talk about current events, and not in a preachy way at all, but he would, or even TV shows that were on that maybe, it's not your favorite, they're definitely not a Christian. It's like, okay, what do you like about this? What do you not like? What do you think is godly or ungodly? So we would make it a discussion, because kids are kind of rebellious. They want to, if you tell them, don't do this, don't do this, of course, they're going to do whatever you tell them not to do. But if you help them to really grab a hold and make it their own, and we did it over dinner, and even now with the grandkids, it's so fun to see. They'll ask questions, and we get some of these greatest questions about even theology, because as they're trying to grapple with it. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah. So bottom line, I tried to include them. I tried as much as I could to help them with stuff they loved. I'm a sports fanatic here in LA. I'm a baseball, football, basketball fanatic. So as my kids were raised playing sports, I was involved in their sports, and we'd often use even that overlapping sometimes into spiritual stuff. So anyway, hope it helps.